Well, good morning and welcome to MEEC's 10th Annual Conference and Vendor Showcase. My name is Andrew Moore. I'm the Executive Chair, or the Chair of the Executive Committee. On behalf of my colleagues on the Board of Directors and the MEEC staff, many thanks for all of you to take the time to come out and be with us today. So this is our 10th anniversary and we've set records this year. We have 68 vendors represented in the showcase right next door, and we have over 400 members who have registered to attend today. So give yourself a round of applause. If you are new to MEEC, this organization is managed by a board who come from K-12, public and private, federal institutions, public libraries, all within the state of Maryland. And inside your program, there's some more information and ways you can get involved to continue to strengthen this organization. Look for board members wearing gray shirts like mine that have the logo on it. There are name tags that represent the various constituents. An ivory is your public libraries, blue is K-12, green is higher ed, and yellow is our vendors. And we also have a number of volunteers. You saw them at the registration desk. They're floating around. So if you have any questions about MEEC, how you can get involved, please feel free to reach out to any of us in these shirts. And I'm just going to kind of embarrass if any members of the executive board or the MEEC board in general, if they're here in the room, would you please stand? So there's some faces there. If you look around, you can hopefully reach out to them. I mentioned a record conference this year with 68 vendors registered. We want to give special thanks to those that make this possible through their support. CDWG did our lanyards, Data Networks did the amazing breakfast. I hope everybody got the donuts. Daily Networks will be providing our lunch today. E+ Technology is doing the conference totes. And Bell Technologies was the one who provided all of our shirts for us today. If you would, please note all of the sponsors, gold, silver, and bronze, that are in both your program and also on your tent cards. They're the ones, again, that are here for you guys. So we have some new contracts that have recently been added to the MEEC lineup. Microsoft Premier and Adobe Sign. A part of that, Adobe Sign, was also an add-on to the current agreement. We have several renewals: the learning management systems, lecture capture, audiovisual hardware, and IT security assessment and advisory services. And then newly renegotiated is our Microsoft contract and also the Microsoft reseller. And that information hopefully will be released within the next several days. MEEC appreciates the numerous volunteers who support the organization. There's RFP teams, there's conference volunteers, and then we sometimes just go back to our members and say, hey, you're the subject matter expert. How would this contract benefit you? Or are there other contracts that need to be put in place that will serve our constituents? I would not be, or I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge three individuals that work tirelessly for the MEEC organization. That's Tamara Petronko, Darby Ashmore, and Pat Collins. So I'd like to give those a round of applause for those people. We're very fortunate today to have the honored Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, President of UMBC, as our keynote speaker. I'm trusting he is somewhere in the room. Dr. Hrabowski is among the most highly regarded and long-serving university presidents in the nation. He's currently in his 26th year at UMBC. He's named one of the top 100 most influential people in the world by Time magazine, and one of America's best leaders by U.S. News and World Report. Most recently, Dr. Hrabowski received one of the highest honors when he's accepted the American Council of Education Lifetime Achievement Award. I encourage you to read his bio that's brief in the program, but more importantly, if you take the time to go to UMB's website, I was quite humbled by the success of this individual. Clearly his upbringing, especially by his mom, transformed his philosophy of education and ability to transform the lives of those that he touches. I came across a quote that really spoke to me. It said, "Freeman is a fierce champion of the traditionally unseen and underserved, and he is a vigorous and powerful mentor." On behalf of the MEEC Consortium, it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Hrabowski.
Appreciate that. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning again. Good morning again. How many of you are morning people? No. Oh, I see. How many of you are not morning people? Well, you know, if you're on my campus, you'll see me walking around sometimes in the morning, and I'm kind of bubbly, and the students are going, shh. If you have students, you know they are not morning people. The truth is, I am not a morning person. But you learn as a leader, you do what you have to do. And I'm delighted. I want to thank Tamara and Jack got me here, my CIO, and Tom for the invitation to come and speak to you. And he's been telling me about the group. How many of you are from K through 12? How many from universities? Very nice, very nice. It's not often that you see people from both in the same room, on the same page, dealing with the same issues. And it seems to me it's particularly significant that technology is something that brings us together as we think about ways of effectiveness and efficiency and having the public believing that we're really working to use funds as wisely as possible. I always begin with poetry. I'm a mathematician. I get goosebumps doing math. Who in the room likes math? Let me see your hands. Oh, it's a pretty nerdy group. Not bad. UMBC is a place where math rocks. But wait a minute. Give my basketball team a round of applause. The two of them had 4.0s, is that they can all read well and they will get good jobs. Give me another big round of applause. But I also want you to give another team a round of applause. We were the 2017 National Collegiate Cybersecurity Champions. Give my team a round of applause for that. With that said, I begin with poetry. My mother, you heard Tom say, my mother was an English teacher, then a math teacher, but she always taught me what William Carlos Williams said, which was, it's difficult to find news in poetry, and yet men die miserably every day because of a lack of what's found there. So I began with words from our beloved and now late Maya Angelou, who looked into the eyes of America at the installation of another president decades ago and said, "Lift up your eyes upon this day, breaking for you. Give birth again to the dream. Women, children, men, take it, this dream, into the palms of your hands. Mold it into the image of your most public self. Sculpt it into the shape of your most private need. Here on the pulse of this new day, you may have the grace to look up and out and into your sister's eyes and into your brother's face and say simply, very simply with hope, good morning." Give her a round of applause for poetry. For poetry. My essential point today is that our dreams and our values shape not only who we are as individuals, as families, as school systems, as universities, but as a society. That the way we think about ourselves, the language that we use in interacting with each other, the values that we hold, the things that are important will be so important we become like that which we love. Everybody in here has a story. And you know, I'm around the country a lot, and I always say Baltimore is the upper South. Did you get that? The upper South. One day we think like Richmond, the next day we think like Philadelphia. Depends on the issue. All the way back to the Civil War, right? But I'm from the deep South. I've been here 40 years, but I grew up in Birmingham. That's not upper South, that's South, all right? Deep South. And in the deep South, and perhaps here in the South, we enjoy stories. How many of you saw the movie years ago, Steel Magnolias, with Dolly Parton? Okay. In the middle of the movie, they're in the beauty parlor, and somebody is talking with great bravado and just bragging on and on and on, and the women are looking at each other like, and the person leaves, and Dolly says to all the other beauticians, there's a story there. There's a story there, all right? Everybody has a story. In fact, I would posit all of us have many stories, and our stories make us who we are. And those stories begin in childhood. Whether you know it or not, whether you are 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever your age, if you think about it long enough, you will realize there were certain stories and events in your life as a child, well before you were 18, that shaped your position and the way you looked at the world. And so I give you a story from my new book on raising people, preparing people to be in STEM, coming as a result of my experiences as a child in Birmingham. I'm sitting in the back of church at 6th Avenue Baptist. I'm there to listen to this guy talk because my parents insisted that I come and hear him. It's the middle of the week. What kid wants to be in church in the middle of the week? My parents placate me with the two things I loved most, math and food. I was getting smarter and fatter all the time. But in the South, they like those cheats. You know what I'm talking about. So all of a sudden, I'm eating M&M's, the good kind with the peanuts. You know that kind. I want you to feel this. I'm doing an algebra problem. I'm 12 years old, and I hear the guy at the lectern say, if the children participate in this peaceful protest, all of America will understand that even our babies, our young people, know the difference between right and wrong. And all I could think about was I was tired of those hand-me-down books. We were always given every year the books years after white kids had used them. Then they were raggedy books. They would put brown people back around and ship them off to us. And while my parents, who had been educators, could have bought my new books, no kid could have new books because then you'd be different from everybody else. So imagine the psychological impact on knowing you're not thought enough of to get your own book, that you only get them after the people of privilege have them. So I said, who is that guy? And they said, Dr. Martin Luther King. And I went home and I told my parents, I want to do what he says. I want to go. And my parents said, absolutely not. And I said to them, you know, you made me go. I didn't want to go. You told me to listen. I kind of listened. And now I want to do what he says. You guys are hypocrites. At that time, you did not tell your parents they were hypocrites. Believe me, you did not do it. And so my dad said, boy, go to your room. The next morning they came in. They had not slept. First time I'd ever seen them looking like they'd been crying. And they said, we prayed all night. The problem was not that we didn't trust you. We did not trust the people who would be over you, because if you march, you are going to jail. And we'd just seen that first day, the dogs and the fire hoses. And they said, but if you want to do this, we'll put you in God's hands, and he'll take care of you. And so I did go. I spent a week there. It was a terrible experience. We were treated like animals, probably the way slaves were treated. We were on the floor. We didn't have enough bathrooms. Little children as young as 8 and 9 crying, just smelly. It was awful. But in the middle of the week, Dr. King came with our parents outside the jailhouse, and he said this: what you children do this day will have an impact on children who've not yet been born. And shortly after that, the March on Washington, and shortly after that, and the tragedy of John Kennedy's being killed, our beloved president, and then the legislation, civil rights legislation, higher education legislation, and amazingly, voting rights legislation between 64 and 65. Now, I told this story in a talk, in an article that I wrote during the time that I chaired the Obama Commission on Education for African Americans. And I sent it over to the White House to make sure it was okay. And these brilliant young people in their 30s wrote back and had crossed out something I said. I said something about those people who had not been born at that time, that Americans would be surprised to know the percentage of people in the world in the mid-60s, for example, compared to today. And they said, well, that's not important. And I said, yeah, it is important. So watch this. Let me show you something. How many of you had not even been born in 1965? Let me see your hands. That is disgusting. I want you to know that. That is perfectly disgusting, all right? You know, that's like when my students say to me, Doc, what was it like back in the day, right? And I said, what day are you talking about? They said, you know, when you became president in 92, before our parents met. So you get, it's That's a depressing situation. How many of you had been born in 1965? Let me see you. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. But the fact is, 2/3 of Americans today had not even been born. Now, why is that important? And the young people said, what difference does that make? I said, how many of you remember where you were and how you felt when 9/11 occurred? Let me ask you that. How many of you remember exactly where you were and you knew exactly what you were doing? In the same way that those of us in the early 60s will remember how horrible it was when President Kennedy was killed in 63, how horrible it was when Dr. King, that feeling in your stomach, this is just awful, right? We remember that. So my point to the young people was, I said, do you think your kids who've not been born yet sometimes will feel the same way you did about 9/11? They said, absolutely not. They weren't here. Well, that's my point. Why do I say that? Because we as human beings must tell our stories. Because we may assume people know and feel and think what we do. But if it's only what they see in the book that they read about, they certainly, the civil rights movement for children today is perhaps in many ways not very different from the Civil War 100 years before that, because they were not here. Now, with that said, the world changed dramatically with that legislation. Let me prove it to you. Let me start by asking this question. The president of Stanford asked college presidents, how long do you think college students can concentrate in a lecture, during a lecture, before they fade out? What do you think the answer was? Let me hear.
12 minutes.
15 minutes.
I heard 15 minutes. 8. Anybody else? 5. Good guesses. It's 8 minutes. Very good. It's exactly 8 minutes. All right. How long do you think any adult, as educated as this group, could concentrate before they begin to fade out? I heard 5 minutes, so you tell them you've already faded out for me, right? I got that. I got that. I got that. I got that, all right? See, you're all successful, late 20th, early 21st century thinkers, and because you're successful, even when you fade out, you look at the person, me, like you're really still listening, but I know you're not. You're thinking about it. I get that. I saw you. I got it, right? So the reason I tell you that, it has a lot to do with technology and what we do on our campus and what I'm going to talk about and the approach I use. I believe my CIO, Jack Seuss, who's Vice President for Information Technology, was for a long time not a Vice President. He was the head of technology, reporting at one point to the administration Vice President, another time to the provost. But what became clear to me years ago was that if I was to understand fully the impact and the capacity and potential of technology, I needed to have that chief technology person reporting directly to me as CEO. Give him a round of applause for that idea, would you? Because my sense, and I work with a lot of school systems, I work with a lot of universities around the country and around the world, and the fact is that the only way technology can be fully taken advantage of and appreciated is if the person is at the beginning of the conversations at the table as we begin to think about what we want to do and what we might be able to do. And so I tell you that because as I talk about lecturing and teaching and learning for a minute, I'm going to go back to that technology. But the fact is that only 8% can literally will focus and then they move out. And so what we have decided is this. We need to get away from simply lecturing all the time. How many of you know that either children in K through 12 and young adults in college are often very bored? How many of you know that? Raise your hands. And how many of you know many will ask, why must I do this? Right? You know, as a math teacher, 40 years, I mean, the greatest example for me is, how many of you remember geometry when you were in 10th, 9th, or 10th, or 11th grade, right? Remember those statements and those reasons, and the person will say, why do I have to study this? And the answer we math teachers have been given to use is this. You study geometry so you can learn how to think, okay? And the kid is hearing that answer and saying, I know how to think. I think you suck. That's what I think. And it happens all the time. And so I tell you that because literally the fact is that when I talk, I'm going to be asking you questions. What percent of Americans in 1965 do you believe 25 and older, 25 years old and older, had graduated from a four-year institution? What do you think? 20%. Now don't let me leave saying you're risk adverse. You got to take a chance.
20%.
20%? Anybody else? 5%? Anybody else? 15? Anybody else? In the back of the room? 35. Good. So this is important because you see, I start from the position, everyone here is an educator. You are educators and you're leaders. And what you do matter, and it's important for you to have a larger context of why you do what you do. And here's the point. It was only 10%. Only. Why do you think I'm asking you before I just give you the answer?
Think about it.
To make you think about it, exactly. Because if I just throw out statistics, you're looking at TV. You know what I mean? It's very passive, and this is what happens so often in classes. People just write on the board, and I mean, there were classes where I only saw the back of a person the whole semester. And so the key, and then you ask a question and people look back at you like, I remember I was in grad school in algebraic topology at the University of Illinois, only a little black kid in the class, and I was accustomed to having a liberal arts experience at my beloved Hampton, and so I'd raise my hand and ask a question. Everybody else, all guys, all white, cool, and they're not saying anything. And I would say, excuse me, I see how you get from step 2 to 3 in this proof, but I don't see how you got from step 3 to step 8. And the professor every time would look around at me and say, isn't it obvious? And all the guys just kind of smirk with him like, yeah, isn't it right? And I'm thinking, if it was obvious, sucker, I wouldn't ask the question, right? But I wasn't old enough to ask that question. But I tell you that because when I got my midterm back in the course in algebraic topology, I'd gotten an A-. Now I'm a chubby little nosy southerner. We like to see what everybody else got. So I'm looking over at everybody's paper, and all these boys, these young men who were older than I was, had gotten C's. And a C in grad school is failing, right? So I held up my paper and I said, I guess it was obvious. So you learn to ask those questions and not to let people define who you are. But I want you to think about this. So 10%. Now that time we broke everything down into black and white. I mean, in the Census Bureau, black people, white people. Today we have all the different groups. But how many of you remember black and white TV? Oh, you look good. Because if you ask my students that question, they go, so what you talking about? TV has always been in color. When I was growing up and we finally got a color TV, I thought it meant a TV where you'd have colored people on. That's how different the world is. That's all I'm saying. Just saying, as my students say. But think about this. So 10%, but what percent of whites do you think got a college degree? Somebody said it should be double that. That's a reasonable assumption, which would mean about 20%, right? Anybody else? Guess, what percent of whites had a college degree in 1965? 60%. You think a lot of white people. Oh, yeah. Human, you got to put human in when you talk about race, right? So I heard 60%, I heard 20%. Anybody else? What did you say? 30, 60, 20. It was only 11%. Only 11%. What percent of blacks? Between 2 and 3%. Most of all of whom come from HBCUs in the South. Now, so that means, think about this, 90% of families in the mid-60s of all races did not think their children would go to college. You get that? Think about that for a minute. In the 40s, there was something called the GI Bill. You remember the GI Bill? You may not, you've read about the GI Bill. You may have family members in the 40s, right? Roosevelt. Who fought the GI Bill? Who was it that said, if you let those veterans into our colleges and universities, our institutions will become, quote, academic hobo jungles? Who do you think said that? University presidents, exactly. And the most prestigious, from Harvard to Chicago. Were they bad people? No. They were the products of their childhood experiences. And to them, college was for people of privilege. They thought that regular people, and they're talking mainly about regular white men, although there were some women and some blacks, but mainly, I mean, 80% regular white guys who were not from privilege. And they thought people of privilege go to universities. If you're a regular person of any race, you should get a trade. And that was the thinking in the 40s. What happened was, within several years, 2 million veterans of all races, men and women, went to college, got degrees, moved into the middle class, and took care of their families. And so people knew regular people could go to college and profit from it, and it could help the economy. Now, why is all that important? What percent today of Americans have earned a college, a 4-year degree? What do you think? 25? 35? Anybody else? 60? You think a lot of people have said yes. It's only 30%. Now, and then we talk about, that's 4-year, and for community college, it's about another 10%, okay? You may not know this, but almost half of all Americans begin college, higher education, in community colleges. And there are some excellent community colleges. Give community colleges around the world. And Maryland is very fortunate. It has superb kids come in and do really well. But the point is, literally, only 30% today. Now, break it down. What percent of whites have a college degree? It's overall it's 30 now. So if somebody said 40, that's a reasonable guess. Anybody else? Come on now, guess. It's 37%. Okay? What percent of blacks? Don't be ashamed, say it. What you think? It's about 21, 22%. What's the fastest growing group in our country? Hispanic. What percent? It's only 14%. Native Americans below that. What is the highest achieving group in America? Say it. What percent of them? I normally get a 90 from somebody. You know you want to say it. You're just trying not to be politically incorrect. Well, it's actually 55%. Okay? One of the reasons is many people from India, China, and other places will come here to grad school and they remain and their kids are here. And so it's a much more educated population. Almost 30% of my students are from Asian countries, particularly China and India. We have students from 100 countries. Make no mistake, the reason we are so good, so much so that 40% of kids in the science areas go immediately to grad school. When the basketball thing came out, people said, well, who is UMBC beyond this area? Well, the New York Times writes, Stanford knows UMBC, MIT knows UMBC, Harvard knows UMBC. I was at Harvard yesterday, and one of the things they said when they were introduced, they said, yeah, they're good at basketball, but they're much better in science than basketball. Give us another round of applause. That's from Harvard. Okay? That's what I'm talking about. Say what? 2/3 of Americans across the races have never had anybody in their families graduate from college. Now, when I say that, all my friends of every race, black, white, Asian, whatever, will say, Freeman, that could be true. Everybody I know has a college degree. Duh! You know, people who work in education know people who work in education. Lawyers know lawyers. Doctors know doctors. Plumbers who make more money than a lot of y'all know plumbers. Give the plumbers a round of applause. Give the plumbers a round of applause. And why do I say that? Because one of my messages today is that we should not use the cookie cutter approach we've used since the 60s. It is good. We've got more people through college and more through community college and both. But everybody doesn't want to go for the typical traditional liberal arts experience. And when I've said this in years before, oh, you're being elitist. No, I'm being real. Okay? I was at a wonderful school, John Carroll, a wonderful high school up in Harford County. And a young man gets up, a middle-class white kid, and he says, and the parents in the back, and teaching the college counselors, and then he says, Dr. Hrabowski, I want you to tell me the truth. Okay, all right. Before he asked the question, right? He said, I hate school. I get B's because my daddy makes me get B's, all right? He says, and they want me to go to college and major in something like history. He said, I'd rather chew glass. Well, he said that part off record, on record. He said, what he said was, he said, I really would hate it. But he said, later on, doctor, I'd rather chew glass. It was so fun. And I said, he said, now tell me, should I be made to go to college? Tell me the truth, doc. Parents are looking at me. Counselors are looking at me. Kids are looking at me, right? And I'm praying, God, give me the strength. Right? So what would you say? What would you say? Now, what am I doing? I know some of you all have begun to fade out, so I got to get you to ask questions. Because if I get you answering, you will not fade out. You get my technology. Nobody uses paper and pencil. They've got a whiteboard. They've got something on their desk that they're using, and a PC. And amazingly, we saw the results change dramatically. Okay? And I'm doing the same thing right now. So answer my question. What would you say to that student?
No. Be a plumber.
Be a plumber? That's one good answer. You make a living. What else? What else?
Education has to be wanted.
Education has to be wanted. Yes,
Get your degree and then do whatever you want to do.
Get your degree and do whatever you want. Anybody else?
My pop used to tell me a lawyer can be a truck driver, but a truck driver can't be a lawyer.
That's an interesting one. A lawyer can be a truck driver, but a truck driver can't be a lawyer. That's an interesting answer. Let me tell you what I said. First thing I did was to say, well, what do you want to do? Right? He said, I like construction. I like building things, okay? And so I said, let me give you a possibility. And I wanted to be honest with him. I said, suppose we could look at programs in community colleges that are in construction management that could lead to a bachelor's and allow you to be in that program working academically and getting involved in construction so you can see how you like it, because I guarantee you, you may like it a lot, but as time goes on, you're going to know you want to be the boss. And to become that boss, you got to go on past the AA and get your bachelor's degree. I said, I promise you that. I said, I promise your daddy that, as I'm saying this, right? That it's going to happen. And people took the time to think about it. What am I saying? I'm saying we need to think about the different options for different students as we think about what's best for them. And while I am a strong component of the liberal arts degree, the fact is that for a number of people, at 18, they're not ready to go through that. And if somebody is not ready, then they just go through it for the motions. It's like what T.S. Eliot said. He had the experience, but missed the point. Okay? You know, and we don't want that. So think about that. Now, here's what I want you to think about. In 1965, only under 10% of people in the bottom quarter of Americans economically actually, after they started going to college, only 10%, under 10% would actually graduate. What percent of the bottom quarter in our country, regardless across races, economically, what percent do you think right now? What's the probability of a child born into a poor family in America actually graduating from a four-year institution? What do you think? It's somewhere between 10 and 15%. Okay? And if the student starts in developmental mathematics in college, he's got, or she, under 10% chance of graduating. And you know developmental mathematics in institutions is middle school math. How many of you like math? So this is what I want you to do. I'm going to give you a math problem. Okay, you ready for it? 29, 6th grade math problem. Do not holler out an answer. If you do, you owe me $50. 29 kids are in the class. 20 have dogs. 15 have cats. How many have both a dog and a cat? Now, don't want you to answer it. Now, I work with the International Math and Science Competition, looking at what happens in other countries, particularly Singapore, China, India, whatever. And what is different is that in other countries, in the educational process, children are given more depth, and they have more time to think about the problems that are more challenging. In our country, we want them to solve problems like this. But when they get to that test that requires more deep thinking, many of our Americans, and so the fact is, when we compete in the international math and science competition, first of all, what country has children, 17-year-olds, who are the most confident in the world? When they leave that test, they say, we got this. What country says that? Japan. Come on. It's America. American kids always leave that test saying, we got this. And yet American kids are always in the bottom half. So the good news is we believe in ourselves. Bad news is we don't know much, but we believe in ourselves. We have a long way to go. We're a little cocky. Okay? But I would argue that there's something very important about believing in ourselves. That what gives our country its greatness is this sense of self, that children can rebel, that they can be independent, that they can be creative. We have kids who come here from other countries, and teachers want us to solve problems with them. And you'd be surprised how the kids would never disagree with the professor. And so there's something to be said about the American system that builds with creativity. The challenge is to find a way to have us teaching students to solve more problems creatively and to figure out how to go deep. Now, how many of you think you have the answer to my problem? Let me put it another way. If somebody can get up here and come up here and give the answer and have it right and explain it, I will give you $1,000 right now. Stand up if you're ready to do that. Stand up. Give him a round of applause. Give him a round of applause. We'll talk after this. I said if, all right? Supposition, right? But see me after. Now, if you bring it up to me and you're wrong, you owe me $100. And I do collect. That's my students. I do collect, all right? That is the thought. But I gave you that problem just right. Oh, is that another one saying you have the answer to? No, you're wrong if you say 15 and you owe me $100. But sit down, because I told you now to answer the question. See, that's what a smarty pants will do. You see? You gotta show up, and you're wrong. All right? Don't be so smart. I love you, but don't be so. No. You're missing the point. No. You're missing the point. In America, we are dying to get the answer. Okay? And we gotta show we know it. All right? There are 3 groups in this room, as there are 3 groups in any class. And this is a kind of metacognitive thought or approach. You have the people who got A's in math, who are looking like they're cool, but they're dying to get that answer. And they're dying to let you know they got that answer. There are people on the other side who are saying, oh God, he's asking a math problem. I hope he didn't look at me. I see, I know who you are, And then there are people in the middle who are saying, well, I'll try, but I don't think I can get it, right? And the fact is, that's every class. That's every class. And the challenge we face is to get more kids who have the confidence to try to work the problem out. I am more interested in someone showing me how you explain it to a 12-year-old without giving her the answer than I am in somebody giving me the answer. The problem in math and education in our country, number one, unlike some other countries, children, young people who are teaching math in elementary and middle school, especially middle school, rarely have much math in their background. They get what's called math for elementary school teachers. And that is less difficult substance-wise than algebra. So the best math teachers would have just been good in high school. Okay? The second problem is we are taught, teach kids to get the answer, as opposed to thinking about it critically. And I want you to think about whether we're using technology, whether we're talking about in math or in history and reading something. The fact is we have to teach students to think more critically, but we need schools and universities where the life of the mind is active, where people are talking about ideas, where they're working on solving math problems, where they're using technology to figure things out. From my perspective, as in thinking about technology, the two thoughts are these. Number one, we are using technology to get away from the traditional lecture, to have a hybrid approach, where we are able to get people working in groups, get them working with the Khan Academy, all kinds of ways to experiment. We actually have what we call these innovation grants that allow people to take more time to think through how the teaching and learning can be done more effectively. On the other hand, the technology is helping us with the biggest problem we have. I told you that literally small numbers of people at the lower end graduate, but the fact is only 50% of students who go to college graduate. 30 million Americans started and never graduated. And I would argue, number one problem, we need to know the students. And that means using technology, how many of you use analytics in your institutions? I would say everybody needs to move to using analytics, to looking at how people use analytics to understand who are these students, where are they succeeding, where are they not succeeding, how can we determine intervention strategies to make a difference. When they leave us, do we know why they left us? Right? Whether it's in high school or college. And most important, how do we use the technology to think about how we make the world better at our institution tomorrow than it is today? So analytics on the one side and use of technology on the other for teaching and learning, more critical than ever. And here is the problem we face. Most of the time, we will generalize about, well, this is the problem. It's never one thing. What the technology allows us to do is to bring specificity to it. So, for example, if you're talking about the 15 or 16% of my students who are black, not enough to know they're black on my campus. I need to know how many have a parent from another country compared to those who've been in this country for generations, because the thought process is different. And quite frankly, typically in America, kids whose parents are from other countries often do better. In fact, throughout the 20th century, if you look at the Nobel laureates in our country, from the humanities to the sciences, many grew up in New York. They were from European families. The parents did not speak English well. And the kid goes to City College, the Harvard, the poor man's Harvard, or Brooklyn College, and they go on and get the Nobel Prize. Why? Hunger, intensity. Because when people come from other places, so often they are so glad to get into this country and to get the opportunity to go to school, and they just work. I had a focus group of students from different places, from Maryland, from New York, other places, and then from other countries, and I was asking about study habits, because I expect students to put in 4, 5, 6 hours a day, every day, all right? And amazingly, when we compared the study habits of students, it was very clear that the kids who were from other countries studied much more, okay? And so I said, why is this? And a young woman from Jamaica got up and said, you know, I don't mean to insult my American friends, but she said this: for most of you, going to college is just the icing on the cake. It's what your parents expect you to do if you're middle class. You just go to college, right? So it's okay. She said, but for me, it's not about the icing on the cake. She said, if I don't excel, my younger brothers and sisters may not eat. She said, so it's not the icing on the cake, it's the very bread of life. And when she said it, she had tears. And it was so good for my students from this country to see the urgency. This is what I want you to get to, that there must be a kind of urgency about helping people succeed. How many of you in this room are either first generation or are first in your family to go to college? Let me see your hands. You look around the room, it's going to be a number. Literally, remember, 2/3 have never done it. I would ask you to tell your stories. I would ask you to help people understand what passion for education means. And I'm going to ask you something that's quite frankly, different from what we normally say. I want us to get away from saying these students are smart and these students are not smart. Because when you just have the smart group, what is it saying to everybody else? It's saying they're not smart. All right? My youngest freshman ever was 9 years old. I have children right now at UMBC of all races, boys and girls, who will get through the calculus sequence before they're 13, who will be in math analysis by that time. Why? They're homeschooled often. They go through the Center for Talented Youth at Hopkins. But this is the point. Yes, they have some gifts, but they work really hard. Really hard. So my freshmen this year coming in, we'll have hundreds with perfect math scores, and they'll think they're the smartest in the world. One of the things you learn in college is you're never the smartest in the world. That we don't even know what smart means. The word we use that I want you to use is grit. Grit. What's the name of the Chesapeake Bay Retriever on my campus? You know what his name is? True Grit. Okay? So we talk about the house of grit. I am most impressed with the student who comes in with a willingness to learn, with a passion for learning, who has this belief, I've got to work really hard, I must take advice. And if you look at my TED Talk, it talks about the high expectations. It talks about the idea of building community among the students. It talks about the fact that it takes people who are experts to bring others into it. Just as Jack brings hundreds of students into technology and they become experts well before they graduate from college. And then it takes evaluating what you're doing. Those keys to success. I want you to think about who you are, who your school is, what difference you make, and how you can be much better. Because we always say at UMBC, success is never final. I want to leave you with a story and then have time for questions if we can. Young man who grew up not far from here had lived in inner city Baltimore. Tavon had been a decent student in middle school, and two things happened. When he was 12, his dad left the family because he had gotten hooked on drugs. By the time he was 13, his mother had the same problem. He was left in a crack house. He said, imagine what happens to a child when you're left by yourself in a crack house. He said, Doc, I've been to hell and back. And so I said, how did you get here to UMBC? He said, one of my teachers told me that the only thing that could help me was to get my education. The only way, he said, because when your dad leaves you, you feel bad. But when your mama leaves you, you feel like you're nothing. He said, and so I went from foster home to foster home, finally got into a group home right out here in this area. And he said, I just remembered two things that somebody had said to me, I needed to keep praying. And I just prayed every God, God help me. And I come home and study. And I worked to get ready for the SAT and so I could come to UMBC. He said, and I got in from going to Poly and coming out to the group home here. He said, and then he said, there were days at UMBC when I had no food. And I learned how to pick the clean part of stuff out of the trash can. By this time, you know, old man can cry. I got tears. I'm thinking, my God, it never occurred to me that one of my kids would not have food. He said, and sometimes I didn't have the money to get back. I didn't have the money to live on campus. I would come back and stay in the back of the library and just sleep. And so I said to him, what's your major? He said, Russian, modern languages. And I said, why? He said, I wanted to get away from everything that I knew. I just wanted to be in a different place, to get away from it. So he did go to Russia. He was fluent in Russian, believe it or not. And I said, who's coming to your graduation? He said, I don't have anybody. I said, what about your grandmother? He said, she's hooked too. And so he said, I said, so you don't see anybody you're related to? He says, Doc, what's strange is sometimes I need to see somebody. He said, I will find a way sometimes to see a relative, but I never let them see me because I'm scared I'll get pulled into that world. And so at his graduation, it was like my deceased mama was talking to you. Your mama talks to you even after she dies. She still tells you what to do. And it was like she was saying, and I'm very serious, like, get up, boy, and say something about this child. And I got up and I said, everybody in here, thousands of people, is here with family because we learn nothing in our lives is more important than our families. But one young man is here by himself, and he's graduating with a 3.5, modern languages in Russian. And I want him to stand. And when he stood, there was a gasp because here was what was so powerful. This kid had helped so many kids of all races with their problems. He listened to everybody's problem. He never told people his background. So often we have children in our schools and teachers and staff members who may be going through hell and we don't even know it. And the challenge we face as educators is to try to get to those stories so we can figure out how best to help people. And my point is this: when he stood, the whole place was like a basketball game, standing ovation, not a drive. It's just unbelievable. He came and he said, "I've never felt love like this. I'll never forget this." That boy went on to Princeton, became a Fulbright, now works for the State Department, helping poor children all over the world. I think about him. Give him a round of applause. We can take one. My story that I give young people is this: we want every child to have somebody who loves him or her. And I want you in your work as technologists, and whatever you do involving technology, to remember, number one, you are that educator. And education changes lives. And so I challenge all of you, watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. I tell my students, your character has everything to do with who you are when your mama's not there. When you don't think anybody can see you, what will you do? So thoughts become words. Words become actions. Actions become habits. Habits become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Dreams and values. All of you are so special, and we can all be much better. Thank you all very much. Robbie said that when he was growing up in New York, Nobel Prize winner, all of his friends' mothers would say, "What did you learn in school today?" at the end of a school day. He said, "But not my mother." He said, "My mother would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today?" And the practice of encouraging his curiosity made him to think of all of us should be working to help young people and ourselves ask good questions. More so than the answers, what are the good questions? Question from somebody, please. Yes?
You've had great success at higher ed. How would that translate to us in K-12?
He said that I've had great success in higher ed. How would that translate? I would say, and I work with school systems around the country, and I start by saying we should be saying all the time pre-K through 12. Give me a hand for early childhood education. Early childhood is very important. And I argue that college presidents should be as concerned about what happens in that first 5 years as we are about the students at the PhD level, because it's a continuum, right? And when I talk about my success or the success of my campus, we're the only four-year campus in the state until this year on that Chronicle of Higher Education lists great colleges to work for. People like to work for us. And the reason is we work to build community. We have to get away from the idea that leaders are one person. You know, Justice Brandeis said the most important office in America is that of citizenship, of citizen. Okay? And I would argue that what has made the difference on our campus, and for me, is building community among our leaders, to have people embracing this vision together. It's not about my vision, it's about it's that we that makes the difference. Anytime people get into a high-powered position, if they're not careful, they'll begin to believe the press. They begin to believe they're really that good, right? And you know, when you're the president, everybody smiles at you, whether they like it or not, right? Okay? But you have to learn, you really have to learn to keep that humility. I think for me, my faith and my humility and being grateful, but by the grace of God. And we have people from all religions, so I'm not proselytizing, but this is just what has made the difference for me. It really is. Okay? Yes, question?
So, could you restate the dog-cat math problem?
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And one of the skills that I appreciate you asking it. One of the skills that we work on is, because young people especially don't listen as carefully. Who can state the problem for me clearly? Who wants to do it? Stand up and state the problem clearly. Come on.
Well, 29 people,
29 people.
20 dogs, 15 cats. How many people have both cat and dog?
Very good. Give him a hand for the question. Did you have something? Okay. All right.
There are 29 people, or not 29 people that have dogs?
29 people in the class.
And 20 have dogs.
And 20 have dogs.
And 15 or 13?
15, and 15 have cats.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And how many have both the dog and cat? Now, I gave that same problem to math teachers in gifted and talented programs at a big conference, much bigger than this, in Las Vegas. And I noticed two things. Number one, nobody wanted to say the answer because they wanted to be right. Number two, they'd had a fun night the night before, if you get my point. When it goes on to Las Vegas, stays in Las Vegas, but all of a sudden somebody gets up, and before I know it, they give me the answer, and I asked her, how did you get it? And she said, I Googled the problem. Do not Google the problem. That is cheating. It's called Hrabowski's problem. I use it all over the world. Do not Google the problem. You got that? All right? There is no glory in cheating. Remember that. All right? Somebody else, another question. Yes?
I just want to point out, it's funny you say about Googling is cheating.
Yeah.
Because I heard this announced, or somebody said this probably about a couple months ago at another conference. Yeah. That Googling or looking something up in today's age with the students isn't cheating. It's using your resources effectively.
Yeah, and I would disagree to this extent. When you're Googling just to get the answer, and when you're supposed to get the answer on your own, it is cheating. But if I say something and you want to know whether it's true or false, or you want to have a larger context, we should be able to, students should use Googling all the time. They really should. Our students use it all the time. Anytime somebody says something to me in a meeting, I'm Googling to see if they're telling the right story, the interpretation, what's the context. So no, Googling is great. But when you say to people, I want you to solve the problem, and you Google to see how the problem is solved, that is cheating, all right? Unless you say, I Googled, then you didn't cheat, you just didn't solve the problem yourself, all right? Somebody else, get on that problem. By the way, I am not giving you the answer to that problem, I should tell you that. Because I want you to dream about it. I want you, when you go home, to drink some wine and think about it. But I can tell you, you're all 20th century thinkers. You know how I know that? I didn't see people huddling together to try to figure it out. You're used to thinking, I've got to get it, and I've got to make sure nobody looks at my paper. All right, you had two kinds of students. Those who do it like this to keep people from other people going to look like this, look at see what other people have done, right? But you all will focus on self, and that's okay. But most of the most fascinating problems will be solved when people interact and challenge each other. Next question. Yes,
Technology is moving at an exponential pace.
Yes.
When will common sense and technology marry?
He said technology is moving at an exponential pace. When will common sense and technology come together? It'll be a long time. But I would say this. When I talk about math and science and engineering, and I talk about my love of math, people assume I don't have great respect for the arts, humanities, and social sciences. One of our challenges in America is we pit people and disciplines against each other. Okay? My campus, yes, has almost half of the students in science and engineering, but the other half are solidly in the arts, humanities, and social sciences. We will have, I was at a big event last night, and a woman who works at the Department of Justice said, my daughter went to UMBC, had a superb experience, majored in English, and she's now at Columbia Law. I've got kids in Northwestern Law. We've had kids at Yale Law. So from law school to med school science. So it's possible to do both. It's the language that we use, Jack and I and others use on my campus. It's the genius of the and versus the tyranny of the or. I wish I had said that, but it's Jim Collins from Good to Great. It's the idea that it's not science or humanities. It should be science, technology, and humanities, right? That is the challenge that we face. And I would argue that one of our real challenges is to help students who are getting this background in technology to also get the grounding in the arts and humanities, because it will be that grounding in the humanities and the arts that will help us understand exactly what human behavior will do, the irrationality of human behavior. I'm on the T. Rowe Price board, and I work a lot with the quant group. The quant group at T. Rowe Price has more PhDs than most math departments, all right? From UMBC to MIT. And one of the interesting questions is, when you're looking at retirement funds, how do you take into account the irrationality of human behavior? Because whether you know it or not, when people retire, they can get really irrational. You know, as we get closer, we start thinking, do I want to do it? Do I not want to do it? When am I going to do it? You know, it's the human experience. You're scared. You're not sure. And so, believe it or not, there are ways of using what we know about psychology and human behavior with the mathematical modeling to look at the possible ways in which somebody might move in relationship to the ways in which they should invest. And so, in many ways, even in the financial industry, perhaps even most, they are looking at those connections like that. Okay, next question. Yes,
How much did your enrollment go up after basketball?
How much did the enrollment go up after basketball? It will be, I mean, our first challenge is we're bursting at the seams right now. My biggest challenge is everybody want science and engineering from around. I mean, I was up in Massachusetts, families came to see me there. I'm trying to get, and we have, this is gonna sound strange, we want even more women at UMBC. We're about 55% guys, okay? And I said that we want more women students at UMBC, okay? Because here's, why do you think residence halls are now co-ed? For many of us when we were in college, at the boys' dorms, at the girls' dorms, why are women's residence halls, I mean, regular residence halls with men and women right now on the same floor? Why? Who knows? I'm going to say y'all are real risky first. Try. I mean, I'm very serious. I really do think you all are not kooky enough. If you're going to have creativity and innovation, you've got to be ready to be a little kooky. I mean, Linear doesn't get it, okay? And so come on, help me out here. Why do you think, just guess, think about it.
Needed more space for the men.
What'd you say?
Strengthening your longevity by producing people who are loyal to your school and offspring that will
So you said, I love the answer. It's not necessarily the case, but I love the answer. Somebody else, stand up and tell me so I can hear you. Stand up and tell me here.
So they can collaborate, study together.
So they can collaborate and study together. It is true that women, I mean, guys usually will say, I got this, right? You know, we always work with guys who come from community colleges because we'll tell them, let's make sure you're ready for this, and they'll say, no, I got this. And I tell them, no, you got this D if you don't listen to me. Right? So the collaboration is important. What else, though?
Maximizing space.
Maximizing space, another good answer, yeah. What else?
How about women push men?
Women do push men. They really do. I would not. I've been married 47 years. And the reason I'm so successful, my wife, 47 years. Give Jackie a round of applause. My wife. Straight up. I give it up. Without her, I am nothing. I'm serious. Okay, somebody else. One more person. Why? Think in the back. Stand up and holler it out.
Because the ratio is not 50% to 50% on college campuses, so to maximize the space, maybe they make everything co-ed.
That's a very good answer. It really is. It's very similar. It's very good. Give all of them a round of applause for their answers. The number one reason that we now have men and women living next door in co-ed dorms, residence halls, is that if it's an all-men floor, they tear it up. When men are by themselves, they get stupid. They get a little beard, they get macho, but when women are around, they want to be a little more cool. They don't want to shout, you know, they want to be a little more, believe it or not, the research shows if you have an all-male dorm or all-male floor, it gets torn up. Fights. But when women are around, the guys don't want to seem too macho. You get that? And so if you have a daughter, send it to us, all right? But that is the reason, it really is. But other questions, please.
Integrating technology into the classroom is really important. But how do you make sure students are using technology wisely and not getting distracted by social media?
She asked a very good question. She believes and she agrees technology should be used in classrooms. One of the questions is, well, how do we make sure they're using the technology wisely? It's a very good point. I'll give you, just before I do that one, so I have a grandson. My grandson, Elijah, is turning 6. And we have noticed when he comes up to visit that he's much too addicted to his tablet. And we will specify, so we did some research, we Googled it to see what about addiction to tab, right? And it did talk about limiting the amount of time and what you said, making sure when they're using it, they're getting some educational value out of it because there's so much software out there. But if you don't, they'll just be doing silly little things that are not teaching them to think, right? And so what I would say to you is this. It is so important that faculty be given the time and support to understand different strategies they can use to make sure the students are using the technology wisely. And if they are having them involved in groups doing things, it's really, and everybody has a role and responsibility, it's hard for somebody to sit back and just text friends. You know, so there's the need for the engagement in such a way that everybody has some responsibility there. And in such a way that the respect for technology and the power of technology, whether it's in Googling or whatever they're doing, just to get research, is used completely. Very important, even when thinking about math problems. We are strong believers it's fine for kids to use a Khan Academy. It's another way of getting them to understand organic chemistry. We want different approaches that can be used in classes. I chaired the National Academy's Committee on Science and Engineering on underrepresentation after the report Rising Above the Gathering Storm, because the report Rising Above the Gathering Storm did not address the question of the changing demographics in our country. We know that by 2040, it's going to be about half minority, half white. My campus now is 50-some% white, 40-some% of color, with the Asian population being the biggest, and then having about 17% black, 6 or 7% Hispanic. And the question is, what will happen to the competitiveness of our country since we know more than half of all the babies born right now are of color? And what will happen to our country given that we are one of the least enlightened societies when thinking about women and technology? In 1990, 36% of all the majors in computer science in America were women. I'm sorry, yeah, 36% were women. So we thought that by 2010, we'd be up to 50%, all right? What do you think the percent of computer science graduates who are women is today? 32%. 18%. 18%. If you look at my campus and look at people getting grad degrees who are women, they're almost invariably 70-80% from other countries. Whether it's China, India, Israel, Turkey, Bangladesh, right? And I challenge you to think about this. When there are hackathons, I'll have 100 students from a state hackathon that we're sponsoring, and you look and I say to the students, what's wrong with this picture? And people said, what do you mean what's wrong? We're okay, right? And I said, well, who's missing? And I'm not even getting to the people of color because there's small numbers there. But I said, what half of the population is missing, right? There'll be 100 students and one woman. One woman, okay? And then a guy will get up very comfortably and say, well, we know girls are just not good at computers. They say it, and we allow them to say it, okay? In all of our schools, the question I would ask in our universities, who's being proactive in countering that idea? I mean, because it needs, if people aren't countering and saying that's crazy, because women are doing as well in mathematics right now, okay? And so we have a Center for Women in IT, where we are training and educating women and men to be ambassadors to say to little girls, you can do this. Because what happens is the boys are the ones learning to code, and they are aggressive about it. So the most interesting camps that we have, to me, in the summer are camps involving middle school girls from all kinds of, from suburban to urban areas on our campus, and the camps focus on coding and yoga. Coding and yoga, okay? Security agency. So when people are laughing about yoga and that, well, the research shows that yoga teaches people to have stamina and strength and assertiveness and sense of self. You become more disciplined with that. The coding you learn to do by doing. We know that, right? Right? And here's the problem in America. We see all the hacking going on, and we see how Russians and Russian women are giving much more support than we are. We don't want to say it, but it's true in technology. But the point is this. If in other countries, women are very involved in the security issues, and if in our country it's all a male thing, heavily white male thing, the question becomes, what happens when the men don't know how women think? How many of you know men really don't know how women think? If you're married, you better raise your hand right here. If you're a bachelor, you're clueless, but believe me, you don't know how they think, all right? Or they know much more about how we think than we know about it. And what NSA knows is this. If you know that one gender doesn't understand another, and yet you have none of that gender in your group, you cannot be as effective. We are challenged right now by countries like Russia. Make no mistake about it. And so when I think about what happens in the classrooms, going back to that, it is a notion of how we help teachers understand that we want to teach the girls and the boys to use technology effectively in the learning process so that they can be comfortable when they go to college and think about majors like computer science. Are we about there? We have time for one more question? Yes,
What technology do you use in your day-to-day, and how did you learn to use it wisely?
I use this for everything. I mean, I'm behind the scenes. I can see Facebook stuff. I cannot be on social media. People are very mean-spirited. As you get more successful, people can be really mean-spirited. All right. So I mean, I'm behind the scenes going what's going on, but I don't want any of it because I mean, I've just had people be too mean to me over the years. But I'm not on my campus, but beyond that. But my point is that it's Jack Seuss. I mean, Jack, I think the chief technology person should be to a CEO, a president, or superintendent the way his general counsel is. the way his fiscal person is. The expertise is so important that it shouldn't be filtered through other people. And if I am to appreciate what data warehousing can do, okay, what analytics can do, or how we're using technology in courses between history and coding, I need to have as much comfort level with it myself to appreciate the power of it. So I'm going to leave you with one thought. I started by saying that Justice Brandeis told us as a country that citizenship is the most important office. Frederick Lawrence, the Secretary of Phi Beta Kappa, has said, what is it we should be doing for our colleges, in our colleges, and for people who are going to be leaders, especially when society is so divided. My students are always saying, Doc, we've never been this divided before. And I said, no, go back to the 60s, the 1960s, or the 1860s. We have been, and they say, oh, Congress is really, they're not nice to each other. That was a time when congressmen would beat each other with canes. So knowing your history is so important, right? But here's my point. When Dr. King died, when President Kennedy died, we all felt almost hopeless. And there are periods when we feel like, what are we coming to? But what's wonderful about our country is that it is the strongest democracy humankind has ever seen. It may be messy, but we always get back up. We always get back up. And at the heart of it is this. We as citizens have the right to determine those people we believe express the values we consider most important. In any party, and my students are brilliant, much more so than their parents' generation, in that they, Republicans, Democrats, and Progressives, come together at UMBC. They have people come and speak from all different perspectives, and they work to find the common ground. Okay? They know how to agree to disagree agreeably. Give that concept a round of applause. To agree to disagree agreeably. And here's my final story from the South. In 1961, my grandmama wanted to vote. She was the wisest woman I'd ever known. 6th grade education, as much as a black person could get back in the early 20s in Alabama. And here's what happened. She went to vote, and she saw the white people Xing, because a lot of people can't even write their names, and voting. But for blacks, there was something called the Alabama literacy test, based on the Constitution. And I took questions from that test when I spoke at the Department of Justice, and many of the lawyers there in the Department of Justice could not answer those questions. They would not be voting today, all right? But they wanted these 6th grade educated people. So, without going into the test today, first time she failed. But then she realized something. She wanted to use community to help her. She had several women go in with the idea, you're going to memorize the first whatever number, you're going to memorize, and then they came back out and they were able to put down what they remembered, and then they created a test based on what they remembered, okay? Then my mama, the English teacher, worked with my grandmama, the 6th grade educated woman, at our dining room table. And if you had heard my grandmother, you would have thought she was a lawyer. And she would then ask me a question, Freeman, ask me a question, Freeman. You know, I was 11 years, I'll never forget it. And so when she came in the house the 3rd time, because she could then vote, she came in and she said, I am now a voting citizen of my country. She was 70 years old. And so when people don't vote, I say, how dare you not vote when people have died so we can have that right. Give voting a round of applause. I would challenge all of us in our work with technology and our work in the humanities, social sciences, to help young people understand it is not just their right, but their responsibility, not to sit back and complain, but to get involved in that process. I want you to stand, and you're going to learn this quote. Come on, stand up, everybody. Stand up, stand up. Stand up, breathe deeply. Okay, you're going to learn this quote very quickly, and I'm going to test you on it. Thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. Again, thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. Okay, let's see if you know it. Watch your thoughts, they become your a little shaky. Now, this time, being mindful makes a difference. Now that you know you're going to have a test, you will not just be like a robot. You will work to remember it. And in your jobs, 2 thoughts. The more mindful you are about what you're doing, the more effective you will be. And the other one is this. There are 2 kinds of people in our society. There are people who can suck every ounce of energy out of your body because they're so negative. You know exactly who they are. Some of y'all in this room right now, you know who you are. Just kidding, just kidding. But then there are people who can elevate you. and you feel so much better. The challenge is this: on any given day, you can be in either category. And as leaders, we must work to elevate people. Thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. One more time. Thoughts, words, actions, habits, character, destiny. Here's the test. Watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your. Watch your actions, they become your. Watch your habits, they become your. Watch your character becomes your. A+, and thank you all very much. Send me your children. Send your children. Thank you. One last thought. I tell my potential parents this: if you send me your child and they take our advice, they will not have to come home and live with you when they graduate. Thank you very much.
So, if you didn't come encouraged and enriched, shame on you. The vendor showcase is open. We've got great sessions. If you need Wi-Fi, pick West. Navigator 18 is the password. Have a great day, everyone.